There is a specific kind of tiredness that has nothing to do with how much sleep you got last night. It is the tiredness of a mind that has spent the whole day trying to prevent things from going wrong, replaying a conversation to check whether you said the right thing, watching a phone screen to see if someone answered the way you needed them to, running through tomorrow's meeting 3 or 4 times before it has even happened. You might call this being responsible. Some days it even feels like love for your family, your work, the people who are counting on you. But underneath the vigilance, if you are honest with yourself late at night, there is something quieter and heavier doing the work. An old belief that if you hold on tightly enough, plan carefully enough, watch closely enough, nothing will be allowed to fall apart. Picture an ordinary morning. Light coming through the curtains, a cup of coffee cooling on the table because you got distracted mid-sip by a thought about something that hasn't happened yet. You are already, before the day has properly started, 3 or 4 moves deep into a mental chess game against outcomes that don't exist yet. It rarely keeps its promise. The meeting still goes the way it goes. The message still arrives on its own schedule, or doesn't arrive at all. The people you love still make their own choices, in their own time, for reasons that live inside them and not inside your worry. And somewhere in the middle of all that gripping, a strange thing happens. The harder you try to hold everything steady, the less steady you actually feel. This isn't a failure of effort. You haven't been doing it wrong. It is only that some of what we call control was never built to carry the weight we keep asking it to hold. If you have ever wondered why staying so alert leaves you more exhausted than the actual problems you are trying to prevent, this is for you. The pattern usually doesn't look dramatic from the outside. It looks like double-checking a text before sending it. It looks like mentally rehearsing a hard conversation so many times that by the time it actually happens, some part of you feels like you have already lived through it and lost. It looks like lying in bed running a list of everything that could still go wrong tomorrow, as though thinking about it hard enough might soften the blow if it does. Even rest gets recruited into the effort. A quiet evening becomes a chance to think 2 steps ahead about tomorrow. A holiday becomes an opportunity to worry about work in a nicer setting. There is rarely a true off switch, because somewhere along the way, staying alert stopped feeling optional. It started feeling like the only thing standing between you and disaster. The body keeps score of this long before the mind admits anything is wrong. Shoulders that won't fully drop. A jaw that aches by evening without an obvious reason. Waking at 3 in the morning with a mind that is already mid-thought, as if the worrying never actually stopped, only paused while you were unconscious. You can sleep 8 hours and still wake up tired, because the exhaustion was never really about hours. It was about a mind that rarely gets permission to stand down. People close to you can usually feel it, even when you are smiling. You show up, you say the right things, you laugh when it is time to laugh. And still, some part of you stays half a step removed, quietly managing, quietly scanning, quietly trying to keep the whole structure from tipping over. It is hard to be fully present with someone when a portion of your attention is always stationed a few moves ahead, trying to prevent the next problem before it arrives. There is also the quiet comparison that creeps in on the harder days, watching other people appear to move through their lives more easily, as though they were simply handed a calmer nervous system, while you are the one holding the whole structure together through sheer, constant effort. It rarely occurs to us that the people who look effortless might just be better at hiding the same exhausting vigilance, not exempt from it. It shows up in concentration too, reading the same paragraph of a book 3 times without absorbing a word of it, because part of your attention never fully left the unresolved thing from earlier in the day. Sitting in a meeting and realizing you missed what was just said, not because you weren't listening, but because some background process in your mind was still running calculations about something entirely unrelated. Over time, this quietly erodes something else as well, your sense of your own capability. You start to wonder why something that should be simple, like being present for an hour, feels so difficult, without realizing the difficulty was never about focus. It was about how much of your attention has been permanently on duty. And underneath all of it, there is usually a fear that rarely gets said out loud. If I stop watching this closely, if I stop trying to steer every outcome, everything will fall apart. That fear is doing a great deal of work in your life. It gets you out of bed early. It keeps you rereading the email one more time. It convinces you that your worry is actually a form of protection, that your vigilance is what has been holding the roof up this whole time. Here is something worth saying clearly. This isn't a character flaw. In fact, it is often the opposite. The people who fall hardest into this pattern are frequently the ones who learned early that watching closely kept them safe, the ones praised for being responsible, for staying a step ahead, for never being the reason something went wrong. Control, for many people, wasn't chosen so much as built, slowly, out of situations where letting go once actually did cost something. A nervous system doesn't easily forget that. It can keep scanning for danger long after the danger has passed, because some earlier version of you is still being protected by a part of your mind that never got the message it can finally rest. Something shifts, though, once you start separating two things that usually blur together into one heavy feeling. Part of what you are carrying is the pain of the situation itself, the uncertainty, the waiting, the disappointment, the diagnosis, the ending of something you weren't ready to end. That pain is real, and no amount of reframing should pretend otherwise. Loss is still loss. Rejection still stings. Growing older still means gradually letting go of a body and a pace of life that once felt like they would last forever. None of this is meant to be talked out of hurting. But there is a second layer, one most of us add without ever deciding to. It is the suffering that comes from arguing with the fact that any of this is happening at all. The insistence that it shouldn't be this way. The mental loop of if only, what if, this isn't fair, running on repeat long after it has stopped offering anything useful. This second layer doesn't change the outcome. It only adds hours of additional weight to a day that was already heavy enough. We rarely get to choose the first kind of pain, but how much of it we end up carrying afterward, pain through resistance, through resentment, through replaying the same 5 minutes of a conversation for the 40th time, often has far more to do with us than we like to admit. That isn't a reason for guilt. It is simply useful information, because unlike the original event, this second layer is something you actually have some influence over. Buddhist practice has old, careful language for exactly this layered experience, and it is worth borrowing some of it here, not as doctrine, but as a way of seeing more clearly. One central idea is impermanence, the simple, sometimes uncomfortable observation that nothing holds still. People change, feelings change, circumstances shift whether we approve of the shift or not. This isn't meant as a sad idea, even though it can sting at first. It is closer to a description of weather than a verdict on your life. When you try to lock something into permanent safety, a relationship, a plan, a version of your health, a certain future, you are quietly asking a river to stop moving. It was never going to hold still, not because you failed to hold it well enough, but because holding still was never something a river could do. Alongside impermanence, it's a teaching often translated as non-attachment, and it is one of the most misunderstood ideas in Buddhist thought. It doesn't mean stop caring. It doesn't mean pretend you don't want things to go a certain way. Non-attachment simply means your peace stops depending on the outcome, matching the picture in your head exactly. You can want the relationship to work and still not need it to be flawless in order to feel safe. You can hope someone calls more often and still not build your entire sense of worth around whether they do. The wanting can stay. It is the desperate gripping around the wanting that gets to soften. A related quality is equanimity, not the absence of feeling, and not some flat, forced calm. It is closer to standing on a small boat that is still rocking, and discovering you don't need the water to go completely still before you can find your footing. Equanimity doesn't ask the storm to stop. It asks you to locate your balance while the storm is still moving through. There is a further piece of this worth naming gently. The idea, sometimes called right effort, that Buddhist practice doesn't ask you to stop acting. It asks you to offer your effort fully and then release your grip on owning the result. You plant, you tend, you show up honestly, And what grows from that is only partly yours to determine. This is closer to how karma is actually understood in Buddhist teaching, not as a cosmic scorekeeper handing out punishments and rewards, but simply as the natural relationship between intentional action and its consequences. You are responsible for the effort. You were never meant to be responsible for controlling the harvest. Something else is worth picturing here, an old image that fits this almost too well: a handful of sand. If you scoop it up and simply hold your palm out flat, it stays. You can carry it, look at it, feel the weight of it, let the wind pass over it. But the moment fear enters the fear of losing it and your hand closes into a fist, the sand begins slipping out between your fingers, faster than it ever would have on its own. The tighter the grip, the quicker the loss. It was never the sand that changed, it was the grip. This is often what control does to the people and outcomes we care about the most. We don't mean to squeeze. We are only trying to keep something precious from disappearing. But the very tightness we use to try to hold on is frequently what pushes it away faster. Whether that something is a relationship, a plan for how life was supposed to look, or a version of the future we quietly demanded certainty from. Maybe you already know this feeling in a very specific way. You send a message that matters, to a partner, a friend, someone you aren't entirely sure still wants you close, and then you wait. You check the phone more often than you would like to admit. You reread your own words, wondering if they landed wrong. Some part of you believes that if you think about it hard enough, you can influence the reply, or at least brace yourself well enough that a possible disappointment won't hurt as much when it arrives. But checking again doesn't make the reply come sooner. It only keeps a small, steady fire of anxiety burning underneath everything else you're trying to do that day. Or perhaps it shows up later, after the day's obligations finally go quiet enough for you to hear your own thoughts. A decision at work, a conversation you need to have with someone and have been putting off. You run through every version of how it could unfold, the version where it goes badly, the version where you say the wrong thing, the version where you are judged, blamed, or found lacking in some way you can't quite name. You tell yourself this is preparation. In small doses it might be. But somewhere past midnight, preparing quietly turns into something else, an attempt to control a future that hasn't happened yet by suffering through it in advance. As though pain rehearsed enough times in your imagination might lose some of its power once it actually arrives. A quieter, more tender kind of control shows up too, one aimed outward instead of inward, at another person rather than at yourself, wanting a partner to be less distant, wanting a parent to finally understand you the way you have always hoped, wanting an adult child to call more, worry less, choose differently than they are choosing. You may not even think of this as control. It can look and feel a great deal like love, like concern, like simply wanting what seems best for someone you care about deeply. But if you notice the tightness that rises when they don't respond the way you had hoped, you may find the same grip that shows up everywhere else in your life, just turned outward this time, aimed at someone whose inner world was never actually yours to manage. It is a strange kind of grief, wanting so badly to give someone a feeling you can't actually hand them. No matter how much you love them or how carefully you explain yourself, you can offer honesty, patience, and time. You can't install understanding in someone else's mind by wanting it enough, however much your worry insists otherwise. None of this means the answer is to stop caring or to go limp and let life happen to you without response. That would trade one kind of suffering for another. Wise response isn't passivity. It is closer to learning to ask a smaller, more honest question. What here is actually mine to influence? You can't control whether someone replies to a message, only whether you send something honest and then let the rest of your evening belong to you again. You can't control whether a decision at work unfolds perfectly, only whether you prepare reasonably and then stop rehearsing disaster past the point where it is doing you any good. You can't control how another person feels about you or chooses to live their life, only how honestly, patiently, and kindly you continue to show up. A river meeting a large stone doesn't stop, and it doesn't demand that the stone move out of its way. It curves. It finds whatever space is actually available and keeps moving through it patiently, without any less force than before, just redirected. This isn't the river giving up. It is the river being intelligent about where its energy can actually go. Letting go of control can work the same way. Not stopping, not collapsing into helplessness. Simply redirecting your effort toward the part of the situation that will actually respond to it, and releasing your grip on the part that never could. Acceptance, understood this way, isn't agreement that everything is fine, and it isn't resignation. It is closer to stopping the argument with what has already happened, so that whatever energy you have left is free to meet what happens next, instead of being spent relitigating what is already done. It is worth asking yourself something honest here, something the grip rarely gives you time to consider. Could you actually handle whatever happens if you weren't the one steering it? Look back far enough, and you will likely find a version of yourself who already lived through something unplanned, something you didn't see coming and couldn't have prevented no matter how carefully you had tried, and survived it. Not because you controlled it into a better shape, but because you met it, one difficult moment at a time, with more capacity than the frightened part of your mind gave you credit for. There will be days when the old grip returns without asking your permission. A stressful call, a piece of unexpected news, a sleepless night, and suddenly you are back to checking, rehearsing, trying to manage things that were never yours to manage. This isn't proof that nothing has changed. Old patterns don't disappear simply because you understand them. They soften with repetition, the same way they were built with repetition, and a single hard day doesn't undo the quieter progress happening underneath it. Noticing you have tightened again, without turning that noticing into another reason for self-criticism, is itself part of the practice. Understanding alone rarely makes any of this real. It tends to ask for small, repeated practice, not as a rule book to follow perfectly, but almost like a gentle experiment you are allowed to run on yourself, one you can adjust as you go. You might begin by quietly naming, just for the next few hours rather than your whole life, what is actually within your reach and what isn't. One is yours to work with. The other is only yours to witness, however uncomfortable that is at first. If a decision is pending, you might separate what you can still prepare from what only time will answer, and let the second half rest instead of dragging it through the rest of your evening. It is a small act, easy to underestimate, and it tends to matter more than it looks like it should. When the urge to control something rises to send a second message, to interrupt, to smooth over someone else's mood, to check an outcome one more time, you might try taking 3 slow breaths before acting on it. Not to force the urge away, but simply to place a little space between the feeling and the reaction. Often that small space is enough to see the situation more clearly than the urgency wanted you to. You could also notice, without judging it, where your body tends to carry this grip. For many people, it lives in the shoulders, the jaw, the stomach, or the space just behind the eyes. Simply noticing it, a quiet, there it is again, can loosen more than an hour of arguing with your own thoughts ever could. And near the end of the day, before sleep, you might try silently releasing one thing you tried to control that day, not because it is resolved, not because you know how it will turn out, simply because you have done what was actually yours to do, and the rest was never fully yours to carry in the first place. You might picture it the way you would blow out a candle at the end of a long evening, not because the day was perfect, but because it is finished, and what is unfinished can wait for morning without your mind standing guard over it all night. If what you are carrying feels heavier than a few quiet practices can hold, if the worry has settled into something that won't lift no matter how gently you meet it, there is nothing weak about reaching for a therapist, a doctor, or someone trained to walk through this alongside you. Reflection like this can support that kind of care. It was never meant to replace it. Picture the handful of sand once more. All this time, some part of you believed the grip was what kept it from disappearing. But it was the grip itself, quietly, that was letting it slip away faster than it ever would have on its own. The people you love were never sand meant to be crushed into staying. The outcomes you fear were never yours to lock into place through sheer force of worry. And you tired, Careful, well-meaning you were never required to hold the entire world steady by yourself. There is a version of you that can open that hand, not because you have stopped caring about any of it, not because you have stopped hoping things go well, but because some part of you is beginning to trust that you can meet whatever actually comes, the reply that doesn't arrive the way you wanted, the decision that doesn't unfold perfectly, the person who doesn't change on your timeline without having needed to control it first. This rarely happens all at once. Hands that have been closed for a long time don't usually fly open in a single moment. They loosen slowly, finger by finger, over weeks and months, sometimes so gradually that you don't notice the change until one ordinary night when you realize you fell asleep without running through a single worst-case scenario, and you don't know exactly when that became possible. This is also true of aging, in its own quiet way. A hand doesn't need the strength of its younger years to still be capable of holding what matters. It only needs to stop confusing capability with grip. Growing older often strips away the illusion that we were ever fully in charge of outcomes to begin with. And there is a kind of dignity available in that honesty, not despair, the dignity of finally working with life as it actually is, instead of the version you once insisted it should be. So if tonight you are tired in that particular way that has nothing to do with how much you slept, maybe the invitation isn't to fix everything before you rest. Maybe it is smaller than that. Just noticing one place where your hand has been closed a little too long. Just letting a small amount of air back into the grip, even if only for the next few minutes. The rain outside your window will keep falling whether you approve of it or not. The river will keep finding its way around the stone whether you agree with the detour or not, and you get to decide again and again whether to meet all of it with a clenched fist or an open hand, not because one guarantees a better outcome than the other, but because one costs you far less on the way there. This kind of peace rarely announces itself. It doesn't usually arrive as a single breakthrough you can point to and say, "There, that was the moment everything changed." More often, it shows up as an ordinary Tuesday, where you notice, almost by accident, that you responded to something uncertain without your whole body bracing for impact. Small, unremarkable, and, if you have lived with the grip for a long time, quietly enormous. You don't need to master any of this tonight. You only need one small willingness to hold a little more loosely than you did yesterday. If you would like, take a slow breath before you go, and ask yourself honestly what you have been gripping the hardest right now. Notice if it would be safe, just for tonight, to loosen your hand around it, even slightly, without needing to solve it first. If a quiet place like this, unhurried, honest, more interested in your peace than your productivity, feels useful to you, you are welcome to stay a while longer. There will be more here whenever you need it.